Some more fun with sticky hands.
This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed.
Okay, we had now already some videos on the sticky hand stuff, and I'm still in the unstructured phase, so I will provide you with some more ideas how this can look like or how it looks like when we do sticky hands in a free play type of way. And let's look at some details this time. If you pay close attention and you compare what we are doing here with some of the classical Wing Chun and Jet Kundo stuff, you will see that we use much less often the straight punch. The straight punch is one of the very typical moves for Wing Chun, Jet Kundo, and I had discussions with some of the Wing Chun channels already about the straight punch, and also with some of the viewers commented on that. So I personally think the straight punch in Wing Chun and Jet Kundo is a fully functional thing, but it's not always the best option. And that's what you can see if you go to other channels that deal with Wing Chun specifically. The straight punch is sometimes much less often seen than some of the curved strikes like a Faksao or whatever. You know what I mean? Striking, for example, with the knife hand or with the fingers or with the fist, but in a circular motion. And why? That heavily depends on your position and on your loading. If you, for example, come from a bongzao, and that's most obvious because also in the classical styles it's then like that, from a bongzao it's very awkward to do a straight punch. It's much easier to perform a faksao. And also from a tanzao, it always depends on the relative position to your opponent whether a straight fist punch is really the shortest and most efficient way to hit the opponent. And that's something where flow sparring and sticky hands is very versatile in teaching you the shortest way of striking. And it's also not always the face, it's not always the neck. Sometimes it's very easy to strike to the back side of the head or to the side of the body. This is also about openings, and therefore it's very educative in this type of exercises. Also, some other deviations you can see here in classical Wing Chun and Jet Kundo. They often say you should not have two hands on one arm of the opponent. We already know that this is not entirely true because there are transitions, crossblock transitions, for example. We had a video on that, where to deal with the forces, you need to switch from one hand to the other. And you can see that here in quite some instances where you have both hands for a very brief moment on one arm of the opponent, but that doesn't mean you are unprotected against the other one. The strong advantage of these situations is sometimes they can be used to make entrances into wrist locks, arm locks, or throwing techniques. The tricky point here is that depends on your relative position to the opponent. That is also a point that a lot of people, in my view, get wrong with the wrist lock entrances. Wrist locks only work in a certain distance to the opponent. We have not talked too much about distances already, but I usually distinguish 12 different distances. And now you'd say, that's much too much and that's complicated and what's that about? This is just a descriptive term. This just should show that there are different techniques at different distances. And for example, wrist locks are rather distant techniques, which means you have to have quite some distance to the opponent in order to make the wrist lock work. If you are too close, they are usually much less painful and the opponent can wriggle out easily. I think that's one of the reasons why we see so few wrist locks when it comes to sparring. The other one is, of course, the use of protective gloves, which make wrist locks really tricky to apply there, and also finger locks. With the flow sparring, you can train nicely this type of distancing and you can recognize, I'm in the right distance to perform a wrist lock, and also I'm in the right position so that the other hand is far enough away, and the wrist lock, the pain of the wrist lock, will block the movement that could come from the other hand. That's what you can see in quite some situations here. That's rather complicated, and I will have to have some videos that describe this basic geometry problem. That's what it is here in some more detail, but it strongly influences our type of sticky hands here. There are a lot of people that don't believe in wrist locks. I have to say wrist locks are super painful. It's really easy to injure somebody with a wrist lock by accident. So you always have to train them very carefully. And that's then again the problem when people say, haha, it's easy to escape because I could do so. Yeah, I believe you escape in many cases not to destroy some of your tendons. I had cases where people would try to force out of a wrist lock and I didn't react fast enough and they injured themselves, ripping off some tendons. That's a very, very strange feeling if you hold the hand and you feel something is broken after some point. Be careful. And if people make fun of the techniques and say they don't work, be sure wrist locks are very, very strong techniques, very, very versatile techniques that give you a lot of control and that have the potential to really make a hand unusable for quite some time and to inflict quite some pain. And it always depends what you want to have with your martial arts. I think it's really, really important that we train together and that we can go home afterwards without the necessity to go to the emergency room after each of the trainings. With the wrist locks trained in normal frames, so in the kata type situation, it's often really the problem. The entrances in the katas are not the shortest ones because they are historically biased for certain situations. And I think if you can manage to have a wrist lock working in kata, that's one step. Then the next step must be that you test it in sticky hands, in flow sparring and similar situations, because you will recognize it's different. It's not the same as with the kata. You have to have this type of interaction, this type of communication that sticky hands especially trains, that you don't have to look for the hand. You can feel the hand, you know where the hand is, you know where you are in relation to the opponent, and then you can make it work. And only after that, you can have some confidence that you have mastered this technique, and then you can go further and try to pressure test stuff like that. But here, sticky hands is so much more than only being a training form for striking and trapping. It is, in my view, a very, very important component if you want to apply so-called soft techniques like wrist locks, arm locks, and whatever in a effective way. You need to experiment that, and the sticky hands are the laboratory where we can do these types of experiments very effectively. I hope this gives you some inspiration, and I hope to see you around next time.